For 2 years straight, my father Richard sat across from me at dinner every single night, talking about his day, discussing work, complaining about bills, yet never once noticed that my plate remained completely untouched, not a single bite taken. While my younger sister Emma ate her portions and Richard consumed his full meals, I pushed food around my plate, pretending to eat, slowly starving myself. The reason why will shake anyone who hears this story to their core. 3 years ago, my world collapsed when my mother died from cancer. The medical bills crushed us financially, leaving us drowning in debt that seemed impossible to escape. But the real nightmare began when my 14-year-old sister Emma was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes just months after Mom's funeral. Emma needed expensive insulin, special dietary requirements, and constant medical monitoring. My father Richard, who worked as a construction foreman, was already struggling to keep our heads above water with the mounting hospital bills from Mom's treatment. I remember the exact moment I realized what I had to do. Emma sat at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face as she stared at a plate with barely 2 ounces of chicken and a few green beans. Richard had just explained that we needed to cut back on groceries to afford her insulin pens. The look of defeat in her eyes reminded me so much of Mom during her final weeks. That night, when Richard went to his room and Emma was washing dishes, I quietly scraped half my dinner onto her plate. The next evening, I did it again. Then, again the following night. Within a week, I was transferring my entire portion to Emma whenever Richard stepped away from the table or turned his attention to the television. Emma noticed immediately, her young face filled with confusion and guilt. "Floyd, you need to eat too," she whispered one evening as I slid my mashed potatoes onto her plate. "I grab lunch at work," I told her, forcing a smile. "You need this more than I do. Your body requires specific nutrition to stay healthy. Promise me you won't tell Dad. This is our special secret to help you get better." Emma reluctantly agreed, understanding even at 14 that our family situation was precarious. Richard, consumed by his own grief and financial stress, treated our dinner conversations like business meetings. He would discuss household logistics, complain about rising utility costs, and review the upcoming week's schedule without ever truly connecting with us emotionally. His eyes rarely left his plate, or the small television mounted in the corner of our cramped kitchen. I convinced myself that missing dinner wasn't a significant problem, since I managed to grab lunch during my shift at the warehouse. I worked double shifts whenever possible, attending community college classes in the morning, and working until 10 or 11 at night. The extra overtime helped cover Emma's medical supplies, though I never told Richard about those purchases. He assumed her school insurance covered everything, and I let him believe that comfortable lie. During those early months, I watched Richard become increasingly distant and mechanically focused on survival. He would arrive home exhausted, heat up whatever simple meal he could prepare quickly, and discuss practical matters while eating. He asked about Emma's blood sugar levels like he was reviewing inventory numbers. He inquired about my college courses the way someone might ask about weather forecasts. There was no warmth, no genuine curiosity, no emotional connection to our responses. Richard never noticed that I spent most of dinner pushing food around my plate, cutting it into smaller pieces, rearranging it to create the illusion of consumption. He never observed that my portions disappeared onto Emma's plate during his frequent trips to retrieve forgotten condiments or answer phone calls. He never registered that I was losing weight steadily, my clothes hanging looser each week. The warehouse work became increasingly difficult as weeks turned into months. Lifting 60-pound boxes for 8-hour shifts, while surviving on lunch and whatever snacks I could afford from vending machines, took a devastating toll on my body. My supervisor, Jake, noticed my declining energy levels and occasional dizzy spells, but I explained them away as stress from college and family responsibilities. After 6 months of this routine, I collapsed during a particularly demanding shift. Jake found me unconscious between towering shelves of inventory, my skin pale and clammy. When I regained consciousness in the break room, Jake's concerned expression told me I couldn't continue hiding my deteriorating condition. "Floyd, when's the last time you had a real meal?" Jake asked, offering me a protein bar from his lunchbox. "I eat fine," I lied, accepting the bar gratefully. "Just tired from school and everything at home." Jake studied my face carefully. "You've lost at least 30 pounds since you started here. That's not healthy weight loss, man. You need to see a doctor." That evening, as I sat at our kitchen table, pretending to eat while transferring my portion to Emma, Richard announced exciting news. His construction company had promoted him to senior foreman with a substantial raise. He seemed genuinely happy for the first time since Mom's death, discussing plans to finally get ahead financially and maybe even take a small vacation. As I listened to his optimistic projections, a crushing realization hit me. The promotion meant our financial situation was improving significantly. My secret sacrifices might not have been necessary anymore. But looking down at my gaunt reflection in the black surface of my untouched plate, I understood that the damage was already done. I was severely malnourished, barely maintaining the strength needed for work and school, and still too proud to admit the truth to anyone. Richard's newfound optimism about our financial situation lasted exactly 3 weeks. Then, Margaret entered our lives like a storm disguised as sunshine. She was a secretary at his construction company, a woman in her early 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair and an arsenal of sympathetic expressions that she deployed whenever Richard mentioned his struggles as a widowed father. Margaret began appearing at our house during dinner time, claiming she needed to discuss work schedules and project details with Richard. Her timing was suspiciously convenient, arriving just as we sat down to eat. Richard would light up in ways I hadn't witnessed since before Mom's illness, becoming animated and attentive as he offered Margaret a seat at our small table. During these visits, Richard transformed into someone I barely recognized. He laughed at Margaret's stories about difficult clients, asked detailed questions about her weekend plans, and seemed genuinely interested in her opinions about everything from local restaurants to television shows. The contrast with his mechanical interactions with Emma and me was painful to witness. With us, he remained distant and preoccupied. With Margaret, he became charming and engaged. Emma and I exchanged uncomfortable glances as Margaret made herself increasingly comfortable in our home. She would comment on our simple meals with subtle suggestions about restaurants she enjoyed, dropping hints about places Richard should try. When Emma mentioned needing new testing strips for her glucose monitor, Margaret changed the subject to discuss her upcoming birthday plans. My suspicions about Margaret's true intentions crystallized one evening when I returned from work earlier than usual. Richard's truck was in the driveway, but the house was empty. A note on the kitchen table explained that he and Margaret had gone to discuss project details over dinner at Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant across town. Emma was at her friend Sarah's house, leaving me alone with a refrigerator containing leftover takeout containers and a growing sense of dread. Curiosity drove me to Richard's truck, where I discovered a collection of receipts scattered across the dashboard. Romano's appeared multiple times, along with charges from Madison's Steakhouse and wine purchases that totaled more than our monthly grocery budget. The dates revealed a pattern stretching back 4 weeks, coinciding perfectly with Margaret's introduction into our lives. That night, I calculated the money Richard had spent on restaurant dinners with Margaret, while Emma rationed her testing strips, and I survived on single meals per day. The total exceeded $600, enough to stock our refrigerator with quality food for over a month. The betrayal cut deeper than simple financial irresponsibility. Richard was experiencing joy, connection, and abundance, while his children struggled with basic needs just feet away from his dinner conversations. Emma's diabetes became increasingly difficult to manage as stress compounded her medical challenges. She needed more frequent glucose monitoring, but the testing strips were expensive, and Richard dismissed her requests as teenage exaggeration. Emma never complained directly, but I noticed her testing less frequently than recommended by her doctor. When I confronted her about skipping tests, she admitted she was trying to make the supplies last longer. "Dad says we need to be more careful with money," Emma explained, avoiding my eyes. "He bought new supplies last month, so these should be enough." I used my overtime pay to secretly purchase additional testing strips and glucose tablets, further reducing the money available for my own nutrition. The irony was devastating. Richard spent freely on romantic dinners, while his diabetic daughter rationed medical supplies, and his son slowly starved. My best friend Danny from the warehouse began expressing concern about my obvious weight loss and declining energy. Danny had worked there for 5 years and took genuine interest in the younger employees' welfare. He started bringing extra sandwiches to work, claiming his wife packed too much food, but I recognized his kindness and felt humiliated by my need. "Floyd, you look like hell lately," Danny said one afternoon as we loaded trucks in the sweltering warehouse heat. "Are you eating enough? I know college is expensive, but you can't survive on air." "I'm fine," I insisted, though we both knew it was false. "Just busy with school and family stuff." Danny persisted with gentle offers of assistance, but my pride prevented me from accepting help or revealing the truth about our family situation. His concern created tension in our friendship as he became frustrated with my obvious lies and stubborn refusal to accept support. The breaking point came when I finally confronted Richard about Margaret and the restaurant expenses. I waited until Emma was asleep, then approached him in the living room, where he was watching television and texting on his phone. "Dad, we need to talk about money and priorities." Richard glanced up from his phone with irritation. "What about them?" "I found receipts in your truck. You've spent over $600 on dinners with Margaret in the past month while Emma rations her medical supplies and we eat leftovers." Richard's face flushed with anger. "You were snooping through my truck? That's completely inappropriate, Floyd. I'm an adult, and I can spend my money however I choose." "Emma is rationing her testing strips because she thinks we can't afford them," I pressed. "Meanwhile, you're buying steaks and wine for someone you barely know." "Margaret understands what I've been through," Richard snapped. "She appreciates the effort I make, unlike some people in this house who only notice what they think I'm doing wrong. I deserve some happiness after everything I've sacrificed for this family." The accusation stung because it revealed how completely Richard had rewritten our family's narrative. In his version, he was the suffering hero deserving of reward, while Emma and I were ungrateful burdens who failed to appreciate his sacrifices. "What about Emma's health?" I asked. "What about making sure she has everything she needs?" "Emma is fine," Richard dismissed. "You're being dramatic about normal teenage issues. Margaret has actually given me some perspective on that. She thinks you both need to learn more independence, instead of relying on me for everything." The conversation concluded with Richard announcing that he was considering proposing to Margaret and wanted me to stop being negative about his happiness. As he returned to texting, I realized that my father had emotionally abandoned his children in favor of a woman who was systematically encouraging him to prioritize her comfort over our basic needs. The man who once promised Mom he would always protect Emma and me had been replaced by someone who viewed us as obstacles to his personal satisfaction. Margaret's influence over Richard intensified rapidly as their relationship progressed. She began making subtle suggestions about our living arrangements, presenting herself as a practical problem solver while slowly poisoning Richard against his own children. During dinner conversations, she would comment on how cramped our house felt with so many people, and how much easier household management would be with fewer complicated dynamics. "Richard, you've done such an amazing job raising these kids alone," Margaret would say, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "But maybe it's time to think about what's best for everyone's future. Floyd is old enough to be independent, and Emma might benefit from specialized care that understands her condition better." Richard absorbed these suggestions eagerly, interpreting them as validation of his parenting rather than manipulation designed to remove us from the equation. Margaret painted a picture of simplified life, where Richard could focus on his career advancement and personal happiness without the constant stress of managing a household with medical needs and teenage complications. The true scope of Richard's financial betrayal became clear when I discovered he had been borrowing against our house to fund his relationship with Margaret. While searching for insurance documents in his desk drawer, I found loan papers indicating he had taken a second mortgage without telling Emma or me. The money wasn't going toward medical bills or household expenses. Instead, Richard had purchased an expensive engagement ring, planned a weekend getaway to Napa Valley, and made a down payment on a new truck to impress Margaret. Our family was actually deeper in debt than before Richard's promotion, despite his increased income. The raise that I had hoped would stabilize our situation was being squandered on romantic gestures, while Emma continued rationing medical supplies, and I grew weaker from malnutrition. My health reached a crisis point during a college exam, when I collapsed in the middle of answering questions about social work ethics. The campus nurse, Mrs. Patterson, immediately recognized signs of severe malnutrition when she examined me in the health center. My blood pressure was dangerously low, my skin appeared sallow and drawn, and I struggled to maintain coherent conversation due to weakness. "Floyd, when did you last have a substantial meal?" Mrs. Patterson asked, checking my pulse and noting my rapid heart rate. "I eat regularly," I lied, though my trembling hands contradicted the claim. Mrs. Patterson had worked with college students for 15 years and possessed extensive experience recognizing food insecurity and eating disorders. She documented my physical condition carefully, explaining that my symptoms indicated prolonged malnutrition rather than temporary illness. "I'm required to report suspected cases of severe neglect to social services," Mrs. Patterson explained gently. "Your condition suggests chronic food deprivation, which puts you at serious risk for organ damage and collapse." I begged her to give me time to address the situation independently, promising to seek help and improve my nutrition within 1 week. Mrs. Patterson agreed reluctantly, but made clear that she would be legally obligated to file a report if I didn't demonstrate significant improvement by our follow-up appointment. That evening, Emma finally understood the full extent of my sacrifices when she caught me transferring my dinner rolls to her plate. She had been focused on homework while eating, but looked up just as I discreetly moved the bread beside her vegetables. "Floyd, stop," Emma whispered, tears immediately filling her eyes. "You've been giving me your food this whole time, haven't you?" I couldn't deny it anymore. Emma broke down crying as she realized that while she thought our family was finally stable, her older brother had been slowly starving himself to ensure her nutritional needs were met. The guilt and horror in her expression made me understand how my secret sacrifice had actually caused her additional emotional trauma. "I thought Dad was finally taking care of us properly," Emma sobbed. "I've been feeling so much better because I was eating enough, but you've been getting sicker and sicker." Emma then revealed something that shocked me even more than my own situation. She had been rationing her insulin to save money, taking smaller doses than prescribed, and testing her blood sugar less frequently to make the supplies last longer. She had noticed the family's financial stress and decided to manage her condition with less medical support to reduce our expenses. "I've been feeling terrible most days," Emma admitted, "but I didn't want Dad to worry about more medical bills when he seemed so stressed already." The realization that both Emma and I had been sacrificing our health to protect Richard's financial situation, while he spent freely on Margaret, created a profound sense of injustice and anger. We were destroying our bodies to maintain a facade of stability, while Richard pursued personal happiness without any awareness of our suffering. The ultimate betrayal came during a family dinner, when Richard announced his engagement plans with characteristic emotional detachment. Margaret had suggested that after their marriage, it would be best for everyone if Emma was placed in a residential facility that specialized in managing diabetic children, while I found my own apartment to begin independent adult life. "Margaret has really helped me think through what's best for our family's future," Richard explained, as if discussing routine household logistics. Emma would get professional medical care around the clock, which would be much better than trying to manage her condition at home. "And Floyd, you're 26 years old. It's time to spread your wings and stop depending on family support." Richard presented this plan as generous problem-solving that would benefit everyone involved. Emma would receive specialized care, I would gain independence, and he could start his new marriage without the complications of managing a household with medical needs and young adult dependencies. He seemed genuinely convinced that abandoning his children represented mature decision-making rather than devastating betrayal. Margaret pointed out that most men my age don't have teenagers and young adults still living at home, Richard continued. "She's helped me realize that I've been enabling dependence instead of encouraging growth. This arrangement will force both of you to develop real independence skills." As Richard outlined the timeline for implementing these changes, Emma and I sat in stunned silence. The man who had promised our dying mother that he would always protect and care for us was systematically planning our abandonment to facilitate his relationship with a woman he had known for less than 6 months. Margaret had successfully convinced him that removing his children from his life represented the optimal solution for everyone involved. The weekend after Richard announced his plan to abandon Emma and me, I made a decision that would change everything. Using money from my college fund, I contacted Sarah Mitchell, a family law attorney who specialized in child welfare cases. I had researched attorneys who offered initial consultations for young adults in crisis situations, and Sarah's practice included extensive experience with parental neglect and abandonment cases. During our meeting, Sarah listened with professional compassion as I explained our family situation in detail. I brought documentation I had been secretly collecting for weeks: photographs of our nearly empty refrigerator, receipts for Emma's medical supplies that I had purchased with my warehouse earnings, bank statements showing Richard's restaurant expenses, and medical records from Mrs. Patterson documenting my malnutrition. "Floyd, what you're describing constitutes clear parental neglect," Sarah explained. "Your father has a legal obligation to provide adequate nutrition and medical care for Emma, and his financial mismanagement, while you suffer malnutrition, creates a strong case for intervention." Sarah outlined our legal options and helped me understand that Richard's plan to institutionalize Emma for his convenience could be challenged successfully in court. She also explained that my documented sacrifices to provide Emma's care could support a petition for temporary custody if Richard followed through with his abandonment plans. Meanwhile, Margaret's manipulation of Richard intensified as their wedding approached. She began openly criticizing my presence in the house, making pointed comments about young men who failed to achieve independence, and suggesting that my continued dependence on family support indicated character flaws rather than financial necessity. "Richard, you've been so generous with Floyd's education and living expenses," Margaret would say during dinner, her tone suggesting concern while delivering criticism. "But at some point, continuing to support adult children becomes enabling rather than helping. Maybe some tough love would motivate him to really commit to supporting himself." Margaret also escalated her campaign against Emma's medical needs, suggesting that residential care would provide better oversight and that managing diabetes at home created unnecessary stress for everyone in the household. She presented herself as practical and caring, while systematically undermining Richard's commitment to his children. "Emma deserves professional medical supervision around the clock," Margaret argued. "Trying to manage her condition with part-time attention isn't really fair to her. Wouldn't you rather know she's getting expert care instead of worrying constantly about emergencies at home?" The confrontation that shattered our family's remaining facade occurred during a dinner when Margaret made a particularly cruel comment about Emma's insulin requirements. Emma had mentioned feeling dizzy earlier in the day, indicating that her blood sugar levels were unstable due to inadequate testing and medication management. Maybe if Emma took more responsibility for monitoring her own condition instead of expecting everyone else to manage it for her, she wouldn't have so many problems, Margaret said, her voice sharp with irritation. Something inside me snapped. Months of suppressed anger, hunger, and protective fury erupted as I could no longer remain silent while watching Margaret systematically destroy what remained of our family. "Emma has been rationing her insulin and testing supplies because Dad spends our grocery money taking you to expensive restaurants," I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. "I've been transferring my dinner to her plate every night for 2 years because there isn't enough food for everyone, while Dad buys you wine and steaks without noticing that his son is literally starving." The silence that followed my outburst was deafening. Emma stared at me with wide eyes. Richard's face flushed with anger, and Margaret appeared genuinely shocked that her manipulation had been exposed so directly. "For 2 years, Dad has sat across from me at this table, every single night, without once noticing that I never eat a single bite," I continued, my voice breaking with exhaustion and pain. "Emma and I have been sacrificing our health to keep this family functioning, while you convinced him that we're burdens he should abandon." Instead of showing concern or remorse, Richard's response revealed how completely Margaret had poisoned his perspective on his own children. Rather than addressing the shocking revelation that I had been starving myself to feed Emma, he accused me of being manipulative and playing the victim to make him feel guilty. "You chose not to eat, Floyd," Richard said coldly. "Nobody forced you to give away your food. If you wanted more, you could have asked, instead of creating this dramatic situation to make me look like a bad father." Richard's complete lack of empathy, or recognition of his failures as a parent, created a moment of devastating clarity. The man who once promised our dying mother that he would protect us had been replaced by someone who viewed our suffering as inconvenience and our love as manipulation. The stress of the confrontation triggered a severe diabetic episode for Emma. Her blood sugar levels, already unstable from inadequate management, crashed dangerously low, as emotional trauma compounded her medical crisis. I recognized the symptoms immediately and called emergency services while Richard and Margaret argued about whether the episode was real or attention-seeking behavior. During the ambulance ride to the hospital, Emma lost consciousness briefly before paramedics stabilized her condition with emergency glucose treatment. The medical team immediately noticed both Emma's obvious malnutrition and my severely underweight appearance, triggering automatic protocols for suspected child welfare issues. At the hospital, medical staff conducted thorough examinations of both Emma and me, while social services were contacted about potential neglect in our household. The attending physician, Dr. Rodriguez, documented Emma's inadequate diabetes management and my signs of chronic malnutrition as evidence of systematic care failures. During separate interviews with the assigned social worker, Patricia Wilson, Emma and I provided detailed accounts of our living situation, while Richard met with hospital administrators to discuss the medical bills. Patricia's experience with family crisis situations helped her quickly understand the dynamics of neglect and financial manipulation that characterized our household. The most shocking revelation came when Patricia informed us that someone had already filed a report about potential neglect in our family 2 weeks earlier. Margaret herself had contacted social services, claiming that Emma and I were unfit to live independently, and recommending that we be removed from Richard's care so he could start fresh with his new relationship. Miss Margaret contacted our department expressing concerns about your father's ability to manage household responsibilities with 2 dependent children, Patricia explained. She suggested that both of you would benefit from alternative living arrangements that would allow your father to focus on his own well-being and recovery from grief. Margaret had been systematically engineering our removal from Richard's life, while presenting herself as a concerned advocate for our welfare. Her manipulation extended beyond influencing Richard's decisions to actively involving government agencies in forcing the abandonment she desired. The woman who smiled sympathetically during dinner conversations had been working behind our backs to destroy our family permanently. Patricia Wilson's investigation into our family situation revealed layers of neglect and manipulation that extended far beyond what Emma and I had realized. As a social worker, with 12 years of experience in family crisis intervention, Patricia recognized the patterns of systematic abandonment and financial abuse that characterized Richard's behavior toward his children. During her comprehensive review of our household, Patricia documented the stark contrast between Richard's spending on personal entertainment and his provision for Emma's medical needs. The evidence I had collected proved invaluable in establishing a timeline of neglect that coincided perfectly with Margaret's introduction into our lives. "Your documentation shows clear parental neglect," Patricia explained during our second interview. "A father who spends $600 monthly on restaurant dinners while his diabetic daughter rations medical supplies has violated his basic duty to provide adequate care." Patricia's investigation extended into our community, where she discovered widespread support for Emma and me that we hadn't even realized existed. Danny from the warehouse had contacted several co-workers when he learned about my situation, organizing a network of families willing to provide temporary assistance with food and basic needs. My college professor, Dr. Helen Martinez, provided testimony about my academic performance decline and obvious weight loss during the semester. Dr. Martinez had noticed my difficulty concentrating during lectures and my struggle to maintain energy during long class sessions, but had attributed the changes to typical college stress until Patricia's investigation revealed the underlying causes. Floyd has been an exceptional student, despite obviously challenging personal circumstances, Dr. Martinez told Patricia. His commitment to his education while managing family responsibilities demonstrates remarkable character, but his physical decline has been concerning to observe. Emma's school counselor, Mrs. Jennifer Adams, reported similar concerns about Emma's emotional state and frequent absences due to poorly managed diabetes symptoms. Mrs. Adams had attempted to contact Richard multiple times about Emma's difficulties, but he had dismissed her concerns as normal teenage adjustment issues. Emma has missed significantly more school this year than in previous years, Mrs. Adams documented. When I've expressed concerns to her father about her health management, he suggested that she's exaggerating her symptoms for attention. The most damaging revelation came when Patricia's investigation uncovered Margaret's history of targeting vulnerable widowed men with financial assets. Working with law enforcement, Patricia discovered that Margaret had been married to 2 previous men who died under circumstances that raised questions about inheritance and family alienation. Margaret's first husband, Robert Chen, had died in a car accident just 3 months after changing his will to leave everything to Margaret instead of his adult children. The children had contested the will, claiming Margaret had manipulated their father into cutting them off financially, but the legal challenge had been unsuccessful due to lack of evidence. Her second husband, Thomas Lee, had suffered a heart attack after Margaret convinced him to take out substantial life insurance policies naming her as beneficiary. Thomas's brother had reported concerns about Margaret's influence over Thomas's medical decisions, but no formal investigation had been conducted due to Thomas's apparent willingness to follow Margaret's suggestions. Margaret appears to have a systematic pattern of targeting grieving widowers with assets and isolating them from their families, Patricia explained to Sarah Mitchell during their coordination meeting. Her previous relationships ended with suspicious deaths and inheritance disputes involving alienated children. Patricia's findings revealed that Margaret's manipulation of Richard followed an established pattern of behavior designed to gain control over his finances, while eliminating any family members who might interfere with her access to his resources. Her suggestions about institutionalizing Emma and forcing my independence weren't motivated by concern for our welfare, but by desire to eliminate obstacles to her inheritance plans. The legal proceedings moved quickly once Patricia presented her evidence to family court. Richard's documented neglect, combined with my demonstration of responsible caregiving for Emma, created a strong case for transferring temporary custody to me rather than following through with Richard's abandonment plans. Richard's response to the legal intervention revealed how completely Margaret had manipulated his perception of reality. Instead of expressing concern about the evidence of his neglect, he remained focused on defending his relationship with Margaret and portraying Emma and me as ungrateful children who had exaggerated our problems to interfere with his happiness. Floyd and Emma have always been dramatic about normal teenage issues, Richard told the court during his custody hearing. Margaret has helped me understand that enabling their dependence isn't healthy for anyone involved. They need to learn independence instead of relying on me to solve every minor problem. Richard's testimony demonstrated his complete disconnection from the reality of his children's suffering and his inability to recognize Margaret's manipulation as anything other than helpful guidance. The man who once loved Emma and me had been psychologically transformed into someone who viewed our basic needs as unreasonable demands and our love as emotional blackmail. Margaret, realizing that the legal investigation threatened her long-term plans, attempted to convince Richard to marry her immediately and relocate to another state where they could start over without the burden of family responsibilities. She presented this as romantic spontaneity, while actually trying to escape the growing scrutiny of her manipulative behavior. Richard, we don't have to let other people control our happiness, Margaret argued during one of their private conversations that I overheard through our thin walls. We could get married this weekend and move somewhere beautiful where we can build the life we deserve without all this drama and interference. Margaret's desperation to accelerate their timeline and remove Richard from legal oversight revealed the calculated nature of her relationship. Her expressions of love and concern had always been strategic manipulation designed to achieve financial security through inheritance and asset acquisition. The investigation culminated when Patricia and law enforcement prepared to arrest Margaret for her pattern of fraudulent activities targeting vulnerable men. Her recorded conversations with Richard contained admissions about planning to eliminate his children from his life and her frustration with legal obstacles to accessing his assets quickly. Richard faced a choice between his children and a woman whose true nature had been thoroughly exposed by professional investigation. The decision he made would determine not only our family's immediate future, but also whether Emma and I would ever again have any relationship with the man who had once promised our dying mother that he would always protect us. The moment of ultimate betrayal came on a cold Tuesday morning in March, when Richard made his final choice. Despite overwhelming evidence of Margaret's manipulation and documented proof of his neglect toward Emma and me, Richard chose to proceed with their marriage and relocation plans. In the family court conference room, surrounded by social workers, attorneys, and child welfare advocates, Richard signed papers relinquishing his parental rights to Emma and agreeing to transfer the house deed to me in exchange for dropping all criminal charges against him. "I've given 26 years to raising children," Richard announced to the assembled professionals, his voice devoid of emotion. "Margaret has shown me that I deserve a chance at personal happiness without constantly managing other people's problems. Floyd is old enough to take responsibility for Emma if he chooses to. But I'm done sacrificing my life for ungrateful kids who only notice what I'm supposedly doing wrong." As Richard signed each document with mechanical efficiency, I watched the final destruction of the father Emma and I had once loved. Margaret stood beside him, her hand possessively placed on his shoulder, unable to completely hide her satisfaction despite attempts to appear sympathetic about the difficult family situation. Emma, now 15 and more mature than many adults I knew, demonstrated remarkable courage during her testimony before the family court judge. She spoke clearly about Richard's neglect, my sacrifices to keep her healthy, and her desire to remain in my care permanently rather than face the uncertainty of foster placement or institutional care. "Floyd has been more of a parent to me than my father for the past 2 years," Emma told Judge Williams with quiet dignity. "When I was scared about managing my diabetes, Floyd learned everything about my condition and made sure I had proper nutrition and medical supplies. When I needed someone to drive me to doctor appointments, Floyd arranged his work schedule around my needs. My father spent that same time taking Margaret to expensive dinners while I rationed insulin." Emma's testimony powerfully impacted everyone in the courtroom, including Richard, who shifted uncomfortably as his daughter described the extent of his abandonment with factual precision rather than emotional manipulation. Unknown to Richard and Margaret, I had been working closely with Patricia and law enforcement for weeks to gather evidence of Margaret's fraudulent activities and her systematic manipulation of vulnerable men. The investigation had uncovered sufficient evidence to file federal charges against Margaret for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit inheritance fraud across multiple states. My strategy required allowing Richard and Margaret to proceed with their marriage plans while law enforcement prepared to arrest Margaret for her crimes. The trap was carefully designed to let Margaret believe she had successfully achieved her goal of marrying Richard and gaining access to his remaining assets, while actually providing investigators with additional evidence of her criminal intent. Sarah Mitchell had helped me understand that protecting Emma required both securing legal custody and ensuring that Margaret couldn't continue manipulating Richard into making decisions that might harm us in the future. The only way to permanently neutralize Margaret's threat was to expose her criminal pattern and separate her from Richard through legal intervention. The community response to our story had been overwhelming once Patricia's investigation brought our situation to public attention. Local news coverage of Richard's abandonment of his children for a manipulative woman generated widespread support for Emma and me, with donations, food assistance, and employment opportunities flowing in from people who were moved by our story of sibling loyalty, overcoming parental neglect. Regional television stations picked up our story after Patricia alerted media about the investigation's findings. The narrative of a young man starving himself to feed his diabetic sister while their father spent money on romantic dinners with a woman who was systematically destroying their family, resonated powerfully with viewers across the Romantine state. The media attention brought job offers for me from companies that valued loyalty and sacrifice, scholarship opportunities for my continued education, and medical support for Emma's diabetes management from healthcare providers who wanted to help our family stabilize and thrive. On the morning of Richard and Margaret's wedding, I felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation as I prepared for the final chapter of our family's transformation. Emma and I had spent the previous evening packing Richard's belongings and preparing our house for a new beginning as a family of two, supported by the community that had rallied around our story. At exactly 11:30 in the morning, as Richard and Margaret exchanged vows in a small ceremony at the courthouse, police officers arrested Margaret on multiple felony charges related to her pattern of defrauding vulnerable men and manipulating them into abandoning their families for her financial benefit. The arrest occurred in front of Richard, Margaret's few remaining friends, and local media, who had been alerted about the culmination of the investigation. Margaret's carefully constructed facade crumbled as she was handcuffed and read her rights, while Richard stood in his wedding suit, realizing that everything about their relationship had been an elaborate deception designed to rob him of his family, his assets, and his future. Evidence presented during Margaret's arrest included recorded conversations where she admitted to targeting Richard because of his grief vulnerability and his assets, detailed plans to institutionalize Emma and force my independence to eliminate obstacles to inheritance, and documentation of her previous marriages to men who had died under suspicious circumstances after being alienated from their families. Richard's face during Margaret's arrest revealed the devastating moment of understanding that he had destroyed his relationship with his children for a woman who had never cared about him, except as a source of financial security. However, the legal documents transferring Emma's custody to me and relinquishing Richard's parental rights had already been filed and processed, making his realization tragically irrelevant to our future. As Margaret was led away in handcuffs, screaming about frame-ups and false accusations, Richard turned to look at me with an expression of confusion and regret that I will remember for the rest of my life. In that moment, he understood that Emma and I had been trying to protect him from a dangerous predator, while he had chosen to view our warnings as jealous interference with his happiness. But the legal custody transfer was final, and Emma and I had already begun building a stable, loving home together without him. The father who had once promised our dying mother that he would always protect us had permanently forfeited his right to be part of our family through his own choices and actions. Margaret's trial became a landmark case in our state's prosecution of elder abuse and inheritance fraud. Federal investigators uncovered evidence linking her to a network of women who systematically targeted grieving widowers across multiple states, using similar manipulation techniques to isolate vulnerable men from their families before draining their financial resources through marriage and inheritance schemes. The evidence against Margaret included documented proof of her involvement in the suspicious deaths of her previous husbands, financial records showing systematic asset transfers following strategic marriages, and recorded conversations where she admitted to viewing her relationships as business investments rather than genuine emotional connections. During her testimony, Margaret showed no remorse for the families she had destroyed or the children she had systematically alienated from their fathers. Instead, she maintained that her victims had willingly chosen her over their families and that she had simply provided them with the companionship they desired. These men were looking for someone who appreciated them without constantly making demands, Margaret testified in her own defense. Their children were ungrateful and selfish, always expecting financial support without giving anything back. I offered these men real partnership and mutual respect. Margaret's complete lack of empathy during cross-examination helped prosecutors demonstrate her calculating nature and her view of human relationships as financial opportunities rather than emotional connections. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before convicting her on all charges, including elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy to commit inheritance theft, and accessory to suspicious deaths in 2 other states. Margaret received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for 8 years. The judge noted that her systematic destruction of multiple families and her role in isolating vulnerable men from their support systems represented particularly cruel violations of trust that warranted severe punishment. Miss Margaret has demonstrated a pattern of predatory behavior that specifically targets people during their most vulnerable moments of grief and loneliness, Judge Williams stated during sentencing. Her actions have destroyed families, eliminated crucial support systems for vulnerable adults, and resulted in tragic consequences, including the death of loving fathers who were manipulated into abandoning their children. Richard's response to Margaret's conviction was complicated and painful to witness. He attended every day of her trial, gradually understanding the extent to which he had been manipulated and the devastating impact of his choices on Emma and me. However, the legal custody arrangements were permanent, and Emma had made clear that she felt safest remaining in my care rather than returning to Richard's household. The court allowed Richard supervised visitation rights with Emma if he completed mandatory parenting classes, financial responsibility counseling, and therapy to address his abandonment of his children. Richard committed to these requirements with genuine remorse, finally understanding the depth of his failures as a father and the incredible sacrifices Emma and I had made to keep our family functioning despite his neglect. I let grief and loneliness make me vulnerable to someone who saw my children as obstacles instead of blessings, Richard admitted during one of our court-supervised meetings. I abandoned the two people who loved me most in the world for someone who never cared about me at all. I understand why you can't trust me anymore, but I hope someday you might let me prove that I can be the father I should have been all along. Richard's therapy sessions revealed the depth of Margaret's psychological manipulation and helped him understand how she had systematically undermined his relationship with Emma and me while presenting herself as a supportive partner. However, acknowledging his manipulation didn't erase the trauma Emma and I had experienced or automatically restore our trust in his commitment to our well-being. My custody of Emma was formalized permanently, with legal recognition of my demonstrated ability to provide stable, loving care for her medical and emotional needs. The settlement from Margaret's seized assets provided a substantial fund for Emma's diabetes management and my continued education, ensuring that we would never again face the financial insecurity that had made us vulnerable to neglect. Emma thrived under our new living arrangements. Her blood sugar levels stabilized with proper nutrition and consistent medical care. Her school attendance improved dramatically, and she began participating in extracurricular activities that helped her build friendships and confidence outside our family crisis. Floyd, I feel safe for the first time since Mom died, Emma told me 6 months after gaining our independence. I know you'll always make sure I have what I need, and I never have to worry about someone trying to get rid of me to make life easier for someone else. Emma also began advocating for other children with diabetes through our local support group, sharing her story about managing her condition during family crisis, and encouraging other families to prioritize medical needs even during financial difficulties. Her experience gave her unique credibility, with both children and parents facing similar challenges. The media attention our story received led to positive changes in child welfare policies and family support services. Our state legislature passed Emma's law, requiring better oversight of families where adult children provide care for siblings with medical needs, and establishing emergency assistance funds for families facing medical financial crises. A foundation was established in our mother's memory to help families avoid the kind of medical debt that had made our family vulnerable to Margaret's manipulation. The foundation provides emergency assistance for medical supplies, connects families with financial counseling resources, and offers support groups for children managing chronic illnesses during family transitions. My college education was completed with full scholarship support from community organizations that had been moved by our story. I graduated with a degree in social work, specializing in family crisis intervention and child welfare advocacy. The personal experience of navigating our family's challenges gave me unique insight into the needs of families facing similar situations. My work at the warehouse evolved into a management position that accommodated my school schedule and provided stable income for Emma and me. Danny became a mentor and close friend, helping me understand that accepting support from caring people strengthens relationships, rather than creating obligation or shame. Richard's journey toward redemption was slow and required consistent demonstration of changed priorities and behavior. After 18 months of therapy and supervised visits, he was allowed longer periods of time with Emma, though she continued living primarily with me due to her preference for the stability we had created together. "I'm learning to be grateful that Emma has you to protect her when I failed to do my job," Richard told me during one of our monthly family meetings. "I lost the right to be her primary parent, but maybe I can still be someone who supports the family you've built together instead of threatening it." Richard's relationship with Emma gradually improved as she saw consistent evidence that he had genuinely changed his priorities and would never again allow anyone to threaten our family's stability. However, Emma maintained clear boundaries about her living arrangements and her need for Richard to respect my role as her primary caregiver. 2 years after Margaret's conviction, Emma and I had created a stable, loving home filled with the security and mutual support that had sustained us through our darkest period. Emma's health was excellently managed, her academic performance was outstanding, and she had developed into a confident, compassionate young woman who used her experience to help other families facing medical and financial challenges. My own health had fully recovered with proper nutrition and medical care. The muscle mass and energy I had lost during years of malnutrition returned as I learned to prioritize my own well-being alongside my responsibility for Emma's care. The experience taught me that taking care of myself was essential for taking care of the people I loved. The warehouse work that had once been a struggle became a source of pride and community connection. My coworkers respected the sacrifices I had made for Emma and supported our family's ongoing stability through friendship and practical assistance when needed. Danny's original offer of extra sandwiches had evolved into a network of families who celebrated our successes and provided support during challenging times. My college professors used our story as a case study in family resilience and the importance of recognizing child welfare issues that might not fit typical patterns of abuse or neglect. Dr. Martinez invited me to speak to her social work classes about identifying families in crisis and understanding the complex dynamics that can make children vulnerable to systematic neglect. Richard eventually remarried a woman named Linda, who embraced his children and grandchildren as blessings rather than obstacles. Linda had raised 2 children of her own as a single mother and understood the importance of putting family relationships above personal convenience. Her influence helped Richard continue his growth as a father and grandfather, though Emma and I maintained our independence and primary loyalty to each other. The empty plates that had symbolized my sacrifice and Richard's neglect became the foundation for a full and meaningful life dedicated to protecting and nurturing others. My experience with hunger motivated ongoing volunteer work with food banks and advocacy for nutrition programs that ensure no child goes without adequate meals due to family financial crisis. Emma's dream of becoming a pediatric nurse was supported by scholarships specifically designed for young people who had overcome medical and family challenges. Her goal was to help other children navigate chronic illnesses with confidence and hope, using her experience to provide both medical care and emotional support. The life lesson that emerged from our journey was profound and lasting. Sometimes protecting the people you love requires incredible personal sacrifice, but true family members notice and value those sacrifices. Love isn't proven by what people say during comfortable times, but by what they do during crisis and hardship. I learned that my worth wasn't determined by others' acknowledgement of my sacrifices, but by my own integrity and commitment to protecting those who needed my care. Speaking up about injustice, even within family relationships, is necessary for healing and growth rather than betrayal of family loyalty. Emma and I discovered that family isn't defined by biological relationships alone, but by consistent demonstration of love, support, and mutual protection. The community that rallied around our story became extended family who celebrated our victories and provided strength during ongoing challenges. Most importantly, I learned that healing from trauma requires building new relationships based on trust and mutual respect, rather than trying to restore relationships with people who have demonstrated their willingness to abandon their responsibilities for why. Personal convenience. Our story continues to inspire families facing similar challenges and serves as a reminder that love, sacrifice, and determination can overcome even the most devastating betrayals when people commit to protecting and supporting each other through every hardship life presents. What would you do if you discovered a family member was sacrificing their own health to protect yours? And how can we better notice when the people we love are struggling in silence? Have you ever had to make difficult choices to protect someone you care about? And what did that experience teach you about the true meaning of family loyalty? Thank you for listening to our story and for taking the time to understand the challenges families face when medical needs and financial stress create impossible choices. I hope our experience encourages you to notice and appreciate the sacrifices people make for your well-being and to speak up when you see injustice happening around you. Please share this story with others who might need to hear about the power of sibling love and family resilience. Like this video, if our journey moved you, subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming hardship through determination and mutual support, and leave a comment sharing your own experiences with family challenges or acts of quiet heroism you've witnessed. May your own family relationships be filled with the kind of love that notices, appreciates, and protects the people who matter most in your life. And may you always have the courage to fight for justice when the people you love are being treated unfairly.